Good afternoon, and welcome to HealthSystemCIO.com All-Star Panel, Adopting Unified Clinical Communications Lessons Learned, a complimentary webinar from HealthSystemCIO.com sponsored by PatientSafe. Just a little housekeeping before we get started. My name is Anthony Guerra. I'm the Editor-in-Chief of HealthSystemCIO.com, and I will be your moderator today. We encourage you to send in your questions. You can do so at any time during the program. Type them into the Q&A box in the lower right-hand corner of your screen and leave the default set to all panelists. We'll be taking those later in the program. You can download the deck using the URL on your screen. We've got a shortened URL at the bottom of each slide as well. And we are recording today's event. It will be posted to our YouTube channel as soon as possible, usually within 2 business days, and you'll receive an email as soon as our archive is ready for viewing. Just so you see how we're going to spend our time today, first we're going to go 35 minutes with our panel discussion, and then we're going to have an audience Q&A of about 10 minutes. On our panel is Steve Shirley, VP of IT and CIO at Parkview Medical Center, Kenneth Kleinberg, Managing Director with the Advisory Board Company, and C. Liu, President with PatientSafe Solutions. We've got some bios up here that we'll show you while our speakers are talking. But with that, we're going to jump right in, and we're going to start off with Steve. Steve, can you give us some background overview on Parkview Medical Center? And after that, you can just start talking about your strategy on mobility and how you've come along so far in the adoption curve. We'll go from there.
Thanks, Anthony. Yes, Parkview Medical Center, we're located about 100 miles south of Denver here in Colorado, where today we're going to be at 60 degrees instead of buried in snow. We are an acute care hospital. We're a level 2 trauma center. We've been able to certify in stroke care, orthopedics, chest pain, to name a few. And most excitedly, we get to serve a catchment area, which is the entire southern and eastern part of Colorado. So about 350,000 lives are within the area we get to serve. Our mobility strategy is something that really goes back to 2006. It's been an incredible and exciting journey for us. The mindset that we started off with is that we wanted to create something called a care team unified communications group. And so when we stepped back and looked at this many years ago, we started to realize that one of the disconnects going on was some of the silo-wise efforts that would go on with different parts of our care team. So that really became the driver of the strategy. And back in that day, we had to, as everybody does, we had to begin somewhere. So we started off with bedside med administration as really the first part of where we would go with this whole care team unified communication strategy. So that was a very successful event back in 2006, 2007. It's kind of interesting to think back to that day because, as I very much expected, there was substantial initial resistance to going from a paper-based MAR and paper-based med administration onto more of the electronified and the use of that system. Now today, if I said to the nurses I was going to take away their devices, it might be very difficult for me to get out of the hospital alive. So it's kind of it's exciting to see where we've gone with that. But our strategy really was to take care of the clinical side first, and so we brought up the bedside med administration. We brought up phlebotomy collection, which we have just some wonderful success stories around that in terms of efficiencies we created. We very much do most of our projects with a lean and a Six Sigma mindset, and when we looked at phlebotomy collection, we had a lot of waste that we were able to eliminate and create effectiveness. We also went to blood bank and got that piece into our system. So once all the clinical pieces were in, we then had the opportunity to start to bring in the communication piece, which is really where we started to tie together the whole care team, and that's what excites me the most. We went into, of course, texting and voice, and both of those have been phenomenally successful. We're actually starting to work now on some opportunities and those, by the way, are internal, so it's all Wi-Fi inside the hospital, very secure. And now we're into that area we all get a little fearful of, and that is to create the external piece to that so that we can tie together those physicians and others who are actually not in the hospital practicing every day. So it's been just an incredible journey for us, and we're really showing it in terms of just how well folks communicate and work together on what they do on a daily basis.
Excellent. Well, I got lots of follow-ups that we can get to in a little bit, but let's go down to our next question, Steve. I appreciate that overview. Can you give us a brief overview of your organization? And I always find this a good question because you're meeting with many institutions, customers, prospective customers. Tell me what you're hearing in this area. What are some of the common problems that people are facing?
Thank you, Anthony. To start with a little bit of a background on PatientSafe in terms of what we do and why that resonates with the area of the solution that Steve and many other CIOs like Steve in the marketplace are looking to solve for mobility at the point of care. PatientSafe is the only mobile solution provider in the market today that really helps hospitals and health systems consolidate care team communications and bedside workflow execution onto a single app via a unified platform that is honestly deployable on almost any smartphone device today. And we're proud of the fact that we can prove that across 90 hospitals today, and every single one of them uses our platform house-wide, so it's not just in a single setting, as you probably heard from Steve's description earlier on. We build on top of the existing infrastructure of our customer and try to relentlessly deliver on the promise of eliminating harm, reducing waste, and improving productivity using these mobility tools that can bridge health system clients as well as clinicians at the bedside beyond just the EMR or legacy telephony setting and be more adaptive and reactive to some of the changes in care as well as the ongoing increasing in demand in terms of the shift in acuity for the inpatient setting. As far as the most common topics I've heard so far in the travel in quite literally the last 10 months of interaction with health system customers as well as prospects, is this notion of how to get unified clinical communication as an entry point on their way to a broader mobility strategy. Many times I've heard that customers are trying to solve some of the issues by looking through the elephant through a single straw. Some start on the secure texting only end, some start on the legacy device replacement end, and many of them always get into a stage where interdisciplinary meetings and alignment across clinical application, IT infrastructure, and really the end user stakeholders that can tie the bedside actions against the enterprise business objectives are needed. So I think this is a very nascent space still in general, and there's many great successes that Steve and Parkview has achieved that we're very happy about and very proud of that we can be a part of to contribute towards that journey. I look forward to more discussion on that.
All right, great. And we could, we've got some follow-up now to discuss there. Ken, let's bring you in here. Talk a little bit about the advisory board company and the specific work that you've done in this area. I believe you did a report on this type of thing. And then some of the interesting findings from your report, and feel free to build on anything you heard from Steve or C.
Yeah, thanks. Ken Kleinberg here. I'm a Managing Director with the Research and Insights Group at the Advisory Board Company in the area of healthcare IT. Advisory Board's been around for more than 3 decades. Based in D.C., we've got close to 3,000 people now in the company, and we serve the majority of the hospitals in the U.S., as well as some facilities now internationally. And we put on our own events, we create white papers, we produce some tools, frameworks, and also have lots of discussion with our members. In the health IT arena, we have our top 10 list every year of issues, and mobility and communication is always a part of that, very key. But what we found, and you mentioned the report that we published last year on this topic in particular, was that organizations have spent certainly a lot of focus on ensuring that their clinicians have access to clinical systems like their electronic health record, and that patients have access to portals and so forth. But we've mostly left it up to these folks to figure out how to communicate with each other. We might give them tools like smartphones or email or the ability to text each other, but we don't generally manage that particularly well. So what we end up with is folks leaving voicemails for each other rather than reaching someone live, lots of annoying overhead pages, sending text messages to people and you're not sure if they were received, sending emails to folks and getting out-of-office replies. So the goal here now is to try to collect all these different ways that we communicate, put them on one platform, integrate them with our clinical systems so that there's context there, and that's how I think we're going to reach care collaboration more effectively.
All right, very good, very good. Okay, Steve, let's start off with you on this question. We're talking about unified clinical communications, and Ken just gave a description of it, but talk to me about what goes on when you have ununified or disunified communications, and this is from your real-world experience. This would be before you began your project or even as you were into it to some degree. Give me some use cases, some scenarios of how things can go wrong.
You bet, Anthony. One of the things that I would start with is really a definition, and I think it's probably mostly the same for us and our peers, but we define a unified care team as, of course, a nurse and a physician, but also the CNA. We include the pharmacist. As everybody knows, that's just become so critical. We have unit-based pharmacists in our hospital now, as well as a meds-to-beds program. We include respiratory therapy in that care team, and we also create lab as a position in the care team. So when we look at what we would call ununified, kind of a lot of the stuff that Ken talked about is exactly what we experience, where you know, the nurse would not have understanding as to where lab was at with a phlebotomy collection. Phlebotomy would not know necessarily that a person right there on the floor they were on needed a collection done. We had some challenges with some texting going on between docs and nurses. I think every hospital's probably had to work through this in a very much non-compliant fashion where they're just using standard cell phones. And so that was really a big issue for us. But just overall, we had those very same issues where if a nurse was not available on a phone or if there was no other way to communicate, it elongated the care for our patients. And actually, I think we feel very strongly that it was also less quality care because there were just longer time spans between the opportunity to take care of that patient.
See, you want to jump in on that one? Again, you've been to a number of institutions, and there's something going wrong, right? This is what you're there to help them solve a problem. Talk about the problem when you find it. What are you commonly seeing again?
Yeah, I commonly see that's a great question because, like I referred to earlier on, oftentimes when we are brought into a prospect or a health system is typically when they have tried something in the past, either started from a simple single-purpose secure texting in or other solutions that are trying to be on the earlier end of the adoption of deploying on a smartphone form factor but couldn't make voice roaming and a number of other issues work. And what we typically run into are frustrated end users who have tried the early adoption side of the solution, but oftentimes what we do is to try to bring the clinical constituents and the IT and infrastructure constituents into the same room and do what we call the mobility stack analysis, where we ask them to lay out from infrastructure to middleware, the end user application, to workflow, to use case, and to potential clinical outcomes they're trying to achieve in the original design intent of adopting these solutions, and really take a slice throughout that stack and really ask them the question about what's truly accomplishable and what requires so many integrations for the different pieces versus what a unifying solution can really bring to you. And what we find is the application proliferation, while a great opportunity for the space in general, it has also gotten noisy and created more fragmentation of user experience at the bedside. And those oftentimes are the problem that folks bring ourselves in to really engage and really figure out how to get a unified platform going there.
Ken, let me run sort of a follow-up by you based on it sounds like what I'm hearing is that organizations are either starting at the wrong point they're picking the wrong starting point or the wrong project as a way to get this going, or they're biting off more than they can chew. Starting in the wrong area, picking the wrong projects, but it sounds like there's some very common errors that are being made when trying to get your arms around this problem. Does that make sense? Maybe you could expand on that.
Yeah, thanks. I think a lot of folks start with a specific pain point like unsecured texting, and they think that just solving that problem will let them move on to what they consider more important things, and then they find out that, that didn't include all the stakeholders that we needed. It was just, for example, a nurse-to-nurse solution or just a doctor-to-doctor solution. So then they look to see, well, how can we connect additional stakeholders across more of the care continuum and find out that the solution they have doesn't really work there. I think the integration piece is really critical here. You want context with these communication systems, and you mentioned starting at the other end of the extreme. You could start with like a unified communications platform from one of the big infrastructure providers, but those solutions aren't going to be integrated with your clinical systems. So somewhere we've got to strike a balance between these single modality approaches that might be specific to healthcare and these cross-platform and cross-industry solutions that aren't specific to healthcare, and find a way of coming together where we've got the multimodal approach and the clinical context.
Steve, can you touch on this? Do I have this sort of framed right as some of the common errors, either biting off more than you can chew or starting in the wrong place?
Well, yeah, absolutely. When we looked at the whole thing, when I think about care team communications, obviously as you define those kind of things, the EMR and the content of the EMR become absolutely critical. And so when we started the whole project and you think about where am I going to start with this thing, I could start with texting or I could start in some place. But it became clearly obvious that we had to improve the quality of care. I think across the country, as an example, there are groups that will give statistics that the use of automated medication administration tool like we have has reduced med errors by up to 80% in some cases. We absolutely feel at this hospital that we improved our med administration record, just no question about it. And so, some of those key clinical wins were just critical to establishing the base for what we wanted to accomplish before we started to launch into communications. And like a lot of hospitals, we had IP solutions as far as SpectraLink and some of the communications we do, but really we had to get that clinical piece right, and we had to get that in place in order to move forward.
Very good, very good. Steve, we're going to come back to you on this one. Where do you think this issue falls on the list in general, on the list of CIO priorities, and should it be higher?
I tell you, I think this is probably one of the most important things we can do, and the reason for that is every one of us as hospitals look at the things that we get the opportunity to do for patients, and we look at, alongside that, compliance with quality measures, and this hospital, as an example, is a Studer hospital, so we've got some very definitive goals that we want to look at. And so when we look at readmission rates and CAUTIs and CLABSIs and pain management and falls and some of those kinds of things, the way that we really feel strongly that we'll get better is by creating this unified communication effort so that everybody's on board with each other. And just to give you a quick example, one of the projects we've started, like a lot of other hospitals, is a meds-to-beds program. So when our patient is ready for discharge, we have a pharmacist, and of course it depends on the acuity level of the patient, but we'll have a pharmacist that actually goes to the patient's room with the meds, explains the meds to the patient, and it really creates an opportunity for a win by hoping the patient will take those things. And so with the use of these tools, the pharmacist is fully aware of where we're at with that patient, what the discharge date looks like, and what our needs are going to be. And so our admission rate is, I think we're right around 8.7 readmission rate right now. That's very important to us. And other examples is an example with CAUTIs and CLABSIs. Huge communication need for everyone in the care team to make sure that we're removing catheters on time and that we're doing the things that are necessary to avoid some of those issues. So as I talked around the hospital, as we look at projects for the next fiscal year, we're in budget right now. Absolutely, these kinds of things are taking a high priority, and one of those is absolutely this piece with external, because we just really feel so very strongly that we've got to have an integrated solution and not just an external texting solution that we can work with. So I think that's really what has really focused us priority-wise.
See, when you're trying to get into organizations or you're in organizations, is this at the CIO level? Are you getting the ear of the CIO, or is it difficult to get it up that high?
Yes, I would say that it was a mix of receptions out there, because I think everybody, again, is looking at the same fundamental issue. However, they approach it and framing it differently. One thing we find very refreshing and inspiring in Parkview's case is Steve's really taken on the mobility process for the very purpose view to make sure it aligns with the clinical outcome at every stage of the way. However, what we saw in some other hospitals, they approach it by, again, looking at some very limited, very small application category, and then eventually realizing there's a downstream problem to solve before they quantify it or qualify it as unified clinical communications. Now, in other hospitals that are more and more aligned with the unified clinical communication discussion is especially when they have adopted some of the earlier form factors and have ran into a variety of challenges and realized this is really a mobility solution on a broader basis, and it rises to the top of the priority list, almost out of the pressures of the proliferation of costs at the point of care when they have multiple different devices to manage and also multiple different applications to manage. And that's another way that it's increasing in priority. But I'm going to have to say that over the last quarter or so, I do see that priority list to be increasing in visibility, as well as a lot more CIO engagement right on the upfront.
Very good. Excellent. Ken, you want to talk about this a little bit, some solutions that you've seen people employ out there to improve their unified communications?
Yeah, I think with the advent of smartphones, which have really just exploded over the last couple of years, we've seen all this power possible. And, to the remark I made earlier, you can't really just let users figure out how to use these on their own. You got to give them some structure for this. And that includes giving them a list of devices, for example, that you're going to support that are going to plug into your unified communications infrastructure most readily. There are a couple of issues that can occur here. You can either be too prescriptive about this and say we're only going to allow, for example, this kind of device, and the hospital has to provide it, that kind of thing. Or you could be at the other extreme, we're going to allow absolutely everything, and then you run into all kinds of challenges there. So I think striking some kind of a balance with what you're going to support, being clear to your users about what the benefits are if they go along with this would be a big part. The devices have to be managed from a device standpoint. Mobile device management, mobile application management has to be important there too. So, ensuring that you've got a good device strategy there that you could support, I think, is one part of this. In terms of investments, I think a lot of folks have felt like, well, haven't we already paid for all this already? Don't people already have these voice over IP phones or whatever else we paid for? And again, I think adding the unified communications infrastructure here on top of just the fact that the devices are out there is important to do. These smartphones are game changers, and devices that can do multiple things now really let us get rid of that tool belt kind of thing. So that's pretty key. Other parts here of integrating, I mentioned this a few times, integrating these unified communication solutions with your clinical systems and directories. There are a lot of moving parts here. organizations are dynamic today. We're connecting with partners, affiliates, and so forth, and directories are always changing. So having some way of ensuring that everybody's connected to the right people on the care team is a big part of this. Just giving them a directory of everybody and anybody in the organization doesn't really help them as much as giving them a list of who is, for example, particularly caring for a patient right now, so they can reach that person rapidly would be another key to making this work better.
Excellent, excellent. Steve, you want to give any additional information about the biggest challenges that you've seen or encountered in your journey?
Well, without question, and I was just looking at one of the questions from one of my peers, one of the biggest challenges we absolutely had is the ability to tie all this into our EMR. We worked for a period of 3 years very diligently with our EMR provider, and we've been with them since 1985. We've just got an exceptional system, but there's a lot of resistance out there to most of the top-level EMRs in terms of some of the integration they'll allow. And one of the things that we saw that was a huge, huge issue for us was the ability to get our medication administration information back into the EMR and into the MAR. So that was a huge challenge for us to work through that, because it just really is something that these companies are resisting. I mean, although they're getting better, we finally succeeded, but it's just been a challenge. So for us, that's the number one. The workflow and really the culture has not been a big deal for us, and a lot of folks think about that. But really, once we had the initial adoption of an automated device for medication administration, folks started to get excited about what they could do next. I still chuckle to this day because we start off with an iPod wrapped in a jacket that does scanning and also has extended battery life, and we've now moved to iPhones, which gives us that ability to do internal communication. But I was really fearful that folks my age, as baby boomers, might be a little less able to adapt to apps, so to speak, and that, of course, the younger folks would fly on the devices. And the pleasant surprise was that really everybody across the board adapted extremely well to the use of the iPhone and the apps. And so that really was a huge benefit to us. Of course, cost. We actually had some benefits in cost because one of the questions one of my peers asked a few minutes ago was about cost, and we will be addressing the external issue. In fact, that's on our plate right this moment. But internally, we're able to use these iPhones completely on a wireless network, so we don't have voice or data costs. It's all just, for the device itself. It's certainly a cost through our infrastructure, but that's been a lot easier for us to work through. There's definitely going to be a challenge as we start to move to the external level, and so I'm excited to see where that goes.
Great.
Yes,
and I'm
Ken,
oh, go ahead, Ken.
I was just going to head on to Steve's remarks. I think when it comes to the workflow and trying to break bad habits, for example, on secure texting, a way to do that is just give someone a better solution and make it easier for them to do the right thing. And soon they realize, wow, I've got the caregivers that I want to know about right here at my fingertips. I can connect with them very rapidly. I know whether they got the message or not. I think that can make the difference. You can't just tell someone don't do it this way. You got to give them something better.
Excellent. And Steve, those questions you referenced, I'm going to get them in front of you verbally so everyone can hear them. So we'll get to those in a moment. I want to ask Steve one question here before we get to the audience Q&A. See, we all know that when vendors and organizations work together, it's a two-way street. The organization has some responsibility. It's got some deliverables on their end to make any partnership successful. So when you're working with organizations, is there anything that gives them great difficulty? We talked about the biggest challenges. What do you see as the most difficult thing for your customers to do, that they have to do to be successful in this area?
That's a great question. I probably have a long list of that, but if I were have to pick one, in the particular learning with every single one of our 90 hospital customer and Parkview included, they're really precious in the sense that they have approached this from a very systemic view, and the demand and the strategy drove from the top down, and as a collaboration between IT and clinical leadership from day one, where there's a very clear organizational charter around what technology role is in enabling a particular workflow, operations, and clinical outcome. You heard several things that Steve mentioned. They're absolutely one of the top hospitals in the Studer community as well. So from a philosophical alignment and operational alignment perspective, that's a home run since day one. And as far as the biggest challenge in getting the entire team to get over the hurdle of, I call it the political will of working through the integration, in addition to the cost side of it, it used to be a huge barrier to adoption for a solution like this in the beginning of the space. However, with meaningful use getting into the next phase of it, and with interoperability being such a key component of all CIO's discussion going forward, we actually see a huge opportunity ahead where not only do the underlying infrastructure vendors, be it on the telephony, middleware, or the EMR side, are really embracing the approach of enabling the customer when they have a clearly articulated strategy and implementation plan and what they want to accomplish with a point-of-care solution going forward. I see a huge opportunity for solutions like ourselves to really partner with the customer, but the key to success here, again, is more of an interdisciplinary collaboration from the very outset versus a only clinically sponsored solution or only an IT-sponsored solution to get across that way. In fact, in addition to some of our early adopters, we're seeing more and more Epic customers to be taking the lessons that they've learned in making Epic implementation successful into choosing unified clinical communications as well as mobility solution that way. They have some of the best governance approach that are easier to resonate with so far. That's my last comment on that as well.
Excellent. All right, now we have a number of audience questions. Most of them are going to be for Steve, but Ken and Sia, if you want to jump in after Steve addresses them, feel free. Steve, let's start with the first one. How does ParkView get around the duplicity of information in your EHR and PatientSafe database? Steve?
That was one of the big challenges we faced. We worked very, very diligently for 3 years to create a level of integration. I was talking about the fact that you need the cooperation of the EMR vendors, and so that was a big deal for us, but we were able to successfully, after 3 years, and we use Meditech, we were actually able to get Meditech to work with us. We built an interface that brings all the med administration record back into Meditech. I had physicians, it was so exciting, I had physicians walking up and down the hall thanking me, and really it's my team, but thanking IT for helping make this happen. So that was very, very big for us, and it really was the tip of the iceberg, because now that we've worked through this, we have lots of other things we want to work through with them to be able to pull stuff back into the record and not create that duplicity of systems.
Very good. Next question. How is ParkView handling texting between clinicians if you are just now working on the external communication with physicians?
Boy, is that ever a wonderful question. It's one of the reasons I don't sleep at night.
Yeah.
So what we've done a couple things. We, like a large number of hospitals, I'm sure, around the country, every day we seem to have less and less physicians in the community, specifically primary care, internal medicine, who actually come to the hospital and follow their patients. So we have a fair number of hospitalists that work with us. We are also a teaching hospital, so we have a number of residents that work with us. So we have a temporary, and I absolutely emphasize the word temporary, solution in place that lets us, through the clinicians, through the nurse as an example, through their Meditech session, they can initiate a communication that will end up on the physician's smartphone in a secure, compliant method. And then that clinician, that physician, can correspond back to the nurse. Again, I emphasize temporary because when we're successful with this, we'll have everything integrated into our PatientSafe process so that the clinician, the physician, will also be able to look at some records in there. as well as what's happening. And the big thing for me is the nurse will have one device, and wherever he or she is, all that information will be traveling to that device. So I can't wait to see where we get in the next 6 months with this external piece. It's big, it's important, and I just, you know, the big thing for us is we are so focused on eliminating silos of tools, which is why, again, that external piece is very temporary at the moment.
Great. Next question. What devices were tested and what did you finally select as the end user device?
So a little bit of history there. When we started in 2006, we started with PatientSafe, but as a different iteration of the company. So we started with what was known as a carrot, which is really just a single-use device. It was wireless because one of the things we were very focused on is not having our clinicians use tethered scanning for any of their applications. So we started off with that single-use device. PatientSafe began to see the opportunity, and we had a lot of conversations with them about trying to get to something that was really an OEM-type solution where we could do other things with it. For instance, a nurse's drug dictionary. One of the other things we do is we have a whole series of videos that we provide for things like episodic treatments. So we might show an inpatient a video on an MRI they're about to have, or a CAT scanner, or some process. And we have those kind of videos that we use on discharge. So one of the things we wanted to be able to do is use the nurse's handheld to actually initiate the video up on the patient's TV. So it's an example of why we were looking more for OEM. So as we began to work with the next iteration of PatientSafe, they brought in an iPod, which we wrapped in, as I was mentioning a little earlier, wrapped in a jacket with a battery and a scanner. Highly successful. The nurses just took to it very quickly and very, very successfully. Apple, I'm a big Apple fan, didn't used to be, but I love the simplicity and the quality of what they create. But Apple, along the way, had the opportunity on an iPod to create voice communication. In one of the upgrades they did to their operating system, they took that away. So it caused us to want to migrate on to the iPhone as far as the ability to get all of our internal communications going. So as it turns out, we really had such success with that initial offering of iPods that we didn't end up doing any kind of a search with Droids or other types of devices. And I can honestly say now, some years later, there's just been no regrets in that decision because the iPhones, the iPods have been incredibly reliable. We're looking at replacing some of the fleet now, and we have a little over 400 devices. But they have just been very sturdy. I watched one day in horror as a person accidentally dropped their device in the street right outside the hospital and picked it up, and it kept on working. So you know, maybe that's a commercial somewhere for Apple, but they're very successful with those.
Yeah. So a question about the costs. How are you managing the costs for voice and data on them? And I guess as a follow-up, are you paying monthly recurring costs for each phone? How many of these devices you have deployed? I think you said 400, but go ahead.
Yeah, so this is exciting. One of the things we've been able to do, and I think it's what creates the power for this, is we recognize that the iPhone has all those capabilities, but we also need the HIPAA compliance and all of the protection and security we can get. So this solution, these devices are all used internally wirelessly, and so they are all, every one of the devices is configured so that if someone borrows one and takes it outside the facility, basically they'll have no luck using it as anything other than a paperweight. So we've been able to manage from that perspective these devices internally. So that means that there are no monthly data charges, no phone charges, any of those things. We simply contract for the software, and then as we need more devices, we purchase them. So I've had an ROI that's worked very nicely because I had a fleet of well over 900 SpectraLinks deployed around the hospital, and I've now cut that down to just over a few hundred by being able to eliminate those devices. So I've actually seen a cost savings as opposed to an increase in cost. So now as we look to this external piece that we're working on now, we have kind of the same expectation that through the opportunities with PatientSafe, we'll be able to continue to use those devices internally on the wireless, and really only the external physician will have to deal with their own personal data charges and those kind of things.
Excellent. Okay, we got a lot of audience questions, so we're going to keep firing them at you, Steve. With the integration into the EMR, have you also been able to get critical lab result notifications to the end user device and have that acknowledged in the EMR upon read receipt?
So that is, we are working on dual projects right now. One, of course, is the external. The other is what we're calling interventions. And so interventions we're defining as a couple of things. One, at the very low level, is the ability to keep the nurse knowledgeable about such simple interventions as, make sure your patient, it's time to get your patient up and walk them, or it's time to do this or that. Then the next piece of that is also vitals interventions. So we are well into that project right now. When completed, we'll have all of the critical values and things like that come into the handheld device so that the nurses not have to go back to the nurse's station or look at a computer on wheels in order to determine that there's something going on with their patient. So we're super excited about that piece, and I think once we get to that level, we're going to do something for our nursing group that is going to just create efficiency beyond belief, because right now there's a lot of work they have to do to go find out what critical labs are or what results are coming back from tests.
Very good. Next question. Is your iPhone deployment one-to-one or one-to-many? If one-to-many, how do you manage that, and how are you managing battery life in a 24/7, 365 world?
That's an awesome question. So we right now use one-to-many. So we've got iPhones deployed in every nursing unit and lab and pharmacy, respiratory therapy, and many places like that. Each shift then comes in, and the caregiver will check out their device. The way the system's set up, as a nurse comes in the morning or in whatever shift they're working, they sign on to the device, and they'll immediately be able to see the care teams that are assigned to their particular patients. So they use that device for their shift, and we've got charging banks that sit around each nursing station, each area of the hospital, and so at the end of the shift, they'll put them in the charging bank. We've been incredibly fortunate because those devices are lasting 24 hours with some degree of charging in between shifts. So for instance, while they're doing bedside report between shifts, they'll be in chargers. But we've had actually no problem at all keeping devices charged up over the course of each of the shifts we run. So that's been exciting because that's one of my top worries, is making sure that battery-operated equipment doesn't die right in the middle of a shift.
Very good. How do you get around some of the inherent issues with the iPhone, such as the wireless antenna being shut down due to power savings and Wi-Fi roaming?
So we did something, and I would say, and see, I'm going to give you a shameless plug right now, but one of the things we look for in a vendor is somebody who is willing to help us think outside the box. Sometimes we just don't have ideas and need somebody else to give them to us, but sometimes we have the ideas. And in the case of this particular device, we took the opportunity to take the wireless network provider or consultant that works for PatientSafe, as well as our engineering team and our wireless network consultant, and we put all those heads together and started to talk about what all this was going to look like. So we spent countless hours configuring what the devices would look like, working on roaming capability. Roaming capability was a challenge to start with, but we also had some Cisco folks in because we're a Cisco shop, and when everything was said and done, we really are at a point where we've got very clean communications. We roam very well. We don't seem to have any issues with antennas on the phones as far as any of that stuff where they're automated shutdowns. So it has worked extremely well, but I can tell you we spent a lot of time working together as a team to pioneer what we felt like had to be the case to make these things work right.
Thank you, Steve. If you don't mind me chiming in, Anthony, that's actually one of the key points that relates to the challenges question in the past. I think thanks to this type of collaboration, we were very deliberate about how we designed the voice and roaming piece of the functionality, as well as the architectural reliability with the overall platform. It's actually a three-way partnership between Apple, Cisco, PatientSafe, that designed an architecture and an integrated framework with a live customer that we iterate on. I believe we're one of the very few that have really figured out, both on the software changes on our end, and also deep integration and understanding of what Apple has to offer and the variety of framework inside Cisco, all the way down to some intricacies in network management where Steve's team has been just exceptional in collaborating onto a reference design that way that we can share with some of our prospect customer and really uphold the standard of an enterprise-grade network that way.
Excellent, excellent. Let me try and get one more question to you, Steve, and then I'll get the rest of these to you offline because we're running out of time. Have you integrated this solution with the nurse call system?
We have not, and that's a pain point for me personally. So we really, you know, one of the things that I think like a lot of the peers that are with us today on this call, I've had my share of family issues over the years in terms of need for medical care, and you make notes of things that are pain points, and I don't mean pain from the medical issues, but continually listening to the calls coming across the line, so-and-so, please call whoever. But there's a lot of things that are frustrating in that area. So for us, really trying to get to the point where we can eliminate a nurse call system and use the PatientSafe system is a focus we have. We're not there yet, but it is definitely a pain point and on my radar.
Excellent. Well, we're going to wrap soon. We haven't heard from Ken in a while. So, Ken, I just want to give you an open-ended chance to give your sort of final thoughts, and based on all your research and work in this area, any advice you can give to our listeners who are either looking to go down this road or have begun their journey.
Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to follow up on something that Steve was just saying about the nurse call integration. You know, you think about how advances are made in an industry and what vendors are there to bring us into the new era. Generally, the old vendors don't do very well in stepping into the new space, and that's one of the pain points we've seen, that this nurse call is in many ways a legacy approach, and what Steve was referring to, a much more integrated solution platform, is really where this is all going. So taking advantage of not only what's common today with these smartphone platforms and apps that we're using in other industries, in healthcare is one big plus. What I see coming down the pike is the use of locationing technologies. Maybe only 10% of hospitals are doing any kind of real locationing today, and wayfinding, more accurate presence, the use of beacon technology, which, as you know, is coming from both Apple and Google, I think is going to really make a huge difference. And if the vendors who are currently out there with these older legacy systems can't adapt, there are a whole new set of vendors that are moving more quickly that are going to really make a difference here.
Excellent. Very, very fantastic discussion. I don't know if I've ever seen so many audience questions. So, Steve, thank you for that presentation, and thank you for fielding all those questions. I also want to thank Ken Kleinberg and C. Lou for being a part of this event. Of course, I want to thank PatientSafe for sponsoring it and allowing this discussion and exploration of this topic to take place. As I mentioned, you'll receive an email when our archive recording has been posted to our YouTube channel. For those of you who hold the CHIME CHCIO certification, attending our webinars gets you 1 CEU. Let CHIME know if you've attended. If you've asked us to let CHIME know, we certainly will. Sponsorship opportunities, you can contact Nancy Wilcox. Questions and comments, you can contact me. When you close out your WebEx window today, you'll have a survey pop up about today's event. We'll take you probably 30 seconds to finish it, and we would appreciate that. We take those very seriously and incorporate your suggestions every week into the next event. And you can go to our website to view our upcoming schedule. So with that, I again want to thank Steve, Ken, and C, and PatientSafe. Everybody have a wonderful day. Thank you.